Okay, so I have to start with a number that just completely short-circuited my brain while I was prepping for this. 3,000 years.
It is a staggering number, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, we talk about the Roman Empire being like the gold standard for longevity.
Sure, that's the one everyone points to.
But ancient Egypt, they were doing their thing, building, governing, being for over 3 millennia. That's longer than Rome, longer than pretty much any other civilization we have on record.
It really puts our whole modern concept of long-term into a very humble perspective.
Right.
We plan for, what, the next fiscal quarter? Maybe a 5-year plan? They were planning for eternity.
Right.
Literally.
Exactly. And here's the stat that always gets me, and I know it's a classic, but it's worth repeating. Cleopatra lived closer in time to the moon landing than she did to the building of the Great Pyramid. That's the scale we're dealing with.
And yet, even now, here in early 2026, we are still completely obsessed with them. You walk into any museum anywhere in the world.
Oh yeah, you know where the crowd is.
You know exactly where the crowd is. It's around the mummy cases.
So for today's deep dive, we're taking this huge source. It's a script for a 95-minute documentary called Ancient Egypt, Secrets of the Pharaohs, and Eternal Legacy. And we're going to try and boil that epic down.
The absolute essentials.
So what's the mission here? What are we trying to find?
Well, the mission is to get past the postcard images.
Well, yeah.
You know, we all know the pyramids, the Sphinx.
Tutankhamun's mask.
Exactly. But the real story here, when the source material really digs into, is about how a civilization mastered this very specific, very difficult environment to create a stable universe all its own.
So it's about more than just tombs.
So much more. It's about engineering, it's about medicine, and it's about this very particular worldview that somehow held it all together for 30 centuries.
Okay, so let's start where the documentary starts. Not with the gold, but with the mud, with the river. Because without the Nile, there's no Egypt. Simple as that, right?
Without a doubt. Geography is destiny in this story. The Egyptians had a really binary way of seeing their world. They called the fertile land right around the river Kemet.
Which means the black land.
Yeah, from that rich, dark silt the river left behind.
And everything else was Dishret, the red land.
The red land, which was the endless Sahara Desert all around them. It's such a stark visual. You could literally stand with one foot in the fertile black soil and the other on the burning red sand.
Wow.
So your whole world is either the land of life or the land of death. There's really no in between.
A green ribbon cutting through a red wasteland. And the source mentions the river flows south to north, which always messes with my head when I look at a map. Upper Egypt is at the bottom.
It confuses everyone at first.
Yeah.
But it's just gravity flowing down to the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
But the most important thing about the Nile wasn't just the water itself. It was the rhythm.
The predictability.
The predictability. The entire Egyptian calendar, their whole concept of time, was dictated by the river's flood cycle.
So they didn't have winter, spring, summer, fall. They had something else.
They had 3 seasons. First was Aket, the inundation. That's July to October, when the river would swell and cover all the farmland.
Okay.
Then came Purit, the growing season, when the water recedes and leaves that amazing black mud. And finally, Shemu, the harvest.
It's amazing. But the source makes a great point. This wasn't just luck. They didn't just sit back and watch it happen.
No, that is a critical distinction. They weren't passive. They engineered their survival. They built canals, catch basins, dikes.
And they used those, what are they called? Shadoofs?
The shadoofs, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is basically a long pole with a bucket on one end and a heavy counterweight on the other.
Almost like a little crane.
Very similar.
Yeah.
It let one farmer lift water from a canal up to a field with, minimal effort. They were managing the flood, because if the flood was too low, you had famine. Too high, villages get washed away. They lived on a razor's edge, but they balanced it with engineering.
And that desert, the Red Land, wasn't just a wasteland. The script calls it a massive defensive wall.
It was the best defense imaginable. If you want to invade early Egypt, you had to march your army across hundreds of miles of waterless sand.
A logistical nightmare.
A total nightmare. So this natural fortress lets their culture just incubate. They didn't have to constantly fight off neighbors. They could look inward. They could focus on these huge, ambitious projects.
Which brings us to the Old Kingdom, the Pyramid Age. It all starts with the unification, right? This king, Narmer, around 3100 BC.
That's the spark. Once you have one government, you can organize labor on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
No.
But they didn't just wake up and build Giza.
No, it was a process.
A total process. They started with mastabas, just flat, rectangular mud brick tombs.
And then you get Imhotep, The script calls him the first named architect in history.
For King Djoser, yeah.
Mm.
And he basically has the idea to stack the mastabas on top of each other, getting smaller as they go up.
Creating the step pyramid.
Exactly. They were learning the physics of stone as they went along. But the leap from that to the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza, it's just staggering.
Okay, let's just run through the stats on the Great Pyramid, because they don't sound real. 481 feet tall, 2.3 million limestone blocks, and the average block weighs 2.5 tons.
The math is just wild. If they worked 12 hours a day, every single day for 20 years, they had to quarry, transport, and set a block roughly every 2 or 3 minutes.
With no wheels, no iron tools.
Just copper chisels and stone hammers, and a whole lot of human organization. And this is where we have to bust that huge myth.
The slave myth.
The slave myth. The movies always show that, right? Thousands of slaves being whipped.
But the source was so clear, the evidence just isn't there?
It's the opposite. We found the villages where the workers lived. They were eating prime beef a luxury. Their skeletons show healed fractures, meaning they had access to medical care. They were paid in bread and beer.
So why do it if you're not forced?
Think of it as a huge public works program. Remember the flood season at Ket?
Right, the fields are all underwater.
So you have thousands of farmers with nothing to do. The state basically says, come build for the God King. We'll feed you. We'll house you. It unified the country, not just spiritually, but economically. It was nation building.
Wow. It wasn't just a vanity project, but okay, the old kingdom collapses. The source hints at climate change.
That's the consensus. The Nile floods became unreliable. And if you're the pharaoh, and your whole deal is that you maintain the order of the universe,
And the river dries up.
you've clearly lost your touch.
Yeah.
So you get chaos. But they bounce back with the Middle Kingdom.
And this era feels different in the script. It's less about giant stone mountains and more about culture.
Literature. It's a more introspective time for sure. You see this explosion in literature like the tale of Cineas and wisdom texts. The pharaohs present themselves more as shepherds of the people, not just distant gods.
But then they get a serious wake-up call. The Hyksos.
Hyksos.
Yeah.
Around 1650 BC, these invaders from Asia show up, and they have technology the Egyptians have never seen before.
This is a real tech shock.
It is. The Egyptians are on foot with simple axes and bows. The Hyksos roll in with horse-drawn chariots
The ancient world's tank.
and composite bows, which were like the sniper rifles of their day. They just couldn't compete. The Hyksos take over northern Egypt. It's a national humiliation.
But I love the Egyptian response. They don't just, give up. They adapt.
They do. The rulers in the south, they hated the Hyksos, but they were also taking notes. They learned how to build chariots. They mastered the composite bow. And eventually, they used that exact same technology to kick the Hyksos out.
And that launches the new kingdom. This is the Egypt of the movies, the empire.
This is the golden age, yeah. After the Hyksos, they decide the best defense is a good offense. They're not hiding behind the desert anymore. They become conquerors.
And you get the absolute rock stars here. First, Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh.
She's incredible. And she didn't rule as a queen. She ruled as a king. In statues, she has the false beard, the male titles. She understood that the role of pharaoh was, well, a male-gendered role, and she had to embody it.
She was focused on trade, too, right? The expedition to Punt.
Yes, bringing back immense wealth. She was a massive builder. But then her stepson, Thutmose III, takes over, and he is the Napoleon of Egypt.
17 military campaigns.
He expands the empire all the way to Syria. He solidifies Egypt as a superpower. But then, a few generations later, you get a real curveball. Akhenaten.
The heretic. This guy just decides, all those gods we've been worshiping for a couple thousand years, we're done with them.
It's the single biggest disruption in Egyptian history. He bans the worship of Amun and all the other gods and says there's only one god, the Akhenaten, the physical disk of the sun.
And moves the capital city to the middle of the desert.
To Amarna. It's a massive shock to the system. And you get this weird temporary artistic revolution. The art becomes strangely realistic, pot bellies, elongated skulls.
But it didn't last.
Not at all. The second he died, the system just snapped right back. His son, Tutankhamun, restores the old gods, and the Egyptians basically try to erase Akhenaten from history.
And then the pendulum swings all the way back to the ultimate showman, Ramses II, Ramses the Great.
If Akhenaten was the rebel, Ramses was the brand manager. He ruled for 66 years, had over 100 kids.
And he put his name on everything.
Everything. If there was a blank wall, he put a statue there. Sometimes he just carved his name over a previous pharaoh's statue.
And he fought the Battle of Kadesh, the The biggest chariot battle ever.
Thousands of chariots. He came home and covered the temple walls with propaganda about how he single-handedly won. In reality, it was a draw. He almost got killed.
Yeah.
But he won the PR war.
So we have all these kings and wars, but I want to get to the why, the belief system. And it all seems to come down to this one concept, Ma'at.
Ma'at is the most important concept in their whole worldview. It's hard to translate, but it means truth, balance, order, justice, all of it.
It's the force that holds everything together.
Exactly. They believe the universe began in chaos, and Ma'at is what keeps that chaos at bay. The pharaoh's main job wasn't to collect taxes. It was to maintain Ma'at.
And that obsession with order extends to the afterlife, the weighing of the heart.
It's such a profound image. After you die, your heart, the seat of your soul and memory, is placed on a scale. And on the other side is the feather of Ma'at.
And if your heart is heavy with sin...
It gets eaten by the monster, Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo.
Yeah.
And you just cease to exist. That was the ultimate fear. Not hell, but annihilation.
But to even get to that point, you needed your body, which is why we have mummification. The details are pretty vivid.
It was a very sophisticated 70-day process. But the part that always gets people is the brain.
They pulled it out through the nose with a hook.
Yep. They just scrambled it up and pulled it out. They didn't think it was important. The heart did all the thinking. But they carefully preserved the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines in canopic jars.
But even so, that shows a real knowledge of anatomy.
Absolutely. Their medicine was surprisingly advanced. They used honey as an antibiotic, which actually works.
Yeah.
There's a papyrus that documents 48 surgical cases,
Yes.
setting bones, stitching wounds. It was real observation-based science.
And speaking of their society, I was really struck by the rights of women.
Yet compared to ancient Greece or Rome, Egyptian women had incredible freedom. Legally, they could own property, run businesses, inherit wealth, even file for divorce.
And a diet was basically bread and beer.
A thick, nutritious, porridge-like beer. It was a food source, and it was safer than river water because the fermentation killed bacteria. Everyone drank it.
So you have this incredibly stable society, but of course nothing lasts forever. The script calls it the slow fall.
It was death by 1,000 cuts. You have these mysterious sea peoples raiding from the Mediterranean, disrupting trade. Then you get these waves of foreign rule.
It becomes a revolving door, doesn't it?
It really does. Libyans, then Nubians, then Assyrians, then Persians. Everyone wanted to control Egypt because it was the breadbasket of the ancient world.
And then in 332 BC, Alexander the Great shows up.
And he's actually welcomed as a liberator because the Egyptians hated the Persians. But his conquest marks the end of native Egyptian rule. From then on, the pharaohs are Greek.
The Ptolemaic dynasty. Which brings us to the most famous Egyptian of all, who wasn't really Egyptian, Cleopatra.
Cleopatra VII. She was Greek by blood, but she was brilliant. She was the first of her family in 300 years to actually learn the Egyptian language.
She was a politician, not just a seductress like in the movie.
A brilliant one, a scholar. She understood that Rome was the new superpower, and she tried to navigate it, using her alliances with Julius Caesar and then Mark Antony to keep Egypt independent.
But she bet on the wrong horse.
She and Antony lost to Octavian at the Battle of Actium. In 30 BC, she took her own life. With her death, Egypt stops being a kingdom and becomes just another province of the Roman Empire.
The political end. But the documentary argues that Egypt didn't really die. Its legacy.
Its legacy is everywhere. The 365-day calendar we use, that's them.
The foundations of geometry, medicine, the aesthetic influence is everywhere.
Exactly. And the source makes a great point. Rome absorbed Egypt, and in doing so, Egyptian culture flowed out into the wider world. The cult of the goddess Isis became huge all over the Roman Empire.
So we're still living in the ripples.
Absolutely. When we look at a pyramid, we're looking at a 3,000-year attempt to create permanence, to build something that could defeat chaos and time.
So the big takeaway here is that this isn't just a history lesson. It's a case study in how to build a world.
And how fragile that world is. It shows that stability requires constant effort. It requires matat. You have to maintain the balance. When you stop, chaos comes back. It's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was 3,000 years before Christ.
That is a powerful place to end. Next time you see a picture of the Sphinx, don't just see a stone lion. See it as a guardian of order, staring down the desert of chaos.
And remember, the people who built it were a lot like us,
Yeah.
just hoping that something of them would last forever.
Well, I think they got their wish. Thanks for joining us on this massive journey. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.